we gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs.
We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth
and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
Great to be back in Canandaigua with you folks. I have a feeling that some of you are going to love this sermon. And I have a feeling that some of you are going to, well, not love this sermon. Okay, got that out of the way. Maybe every sermon should come with that disclaimer. I'm not exactly sure. Put a trademark on that line. But I offer it this morning because my sermon today is actually about complaining. I am going to attempt to talk some of you out of a habit you've come to rely on, that you might secretly even adore, or at least accept as second nature. The reason that I imagine some of you won't like it, well, okay, one person doesn't like it. Right, yeah. Let's hope that doesn't spread, or I'm just never, have no hope of finishing. I imagine that some of you, as I say, won't like it because I remember how much I didn't like something that I read a number of years ago on this subject. I didn't like it not because it was wrong or off the mark, but because it was so dead on. For me, at least. It was so true for me that I haven't been able to forget it after all these years. It was this statement. Complaining is a way of boasting how much suffering one can endure. Complaining, a way of boasting how much suffering one can endure. Pierced me straight through. Got my attention then and now. Mostly because I didn't want to be that person. Most of us of a certain age, quote unquote, remember the weekly gripe sessions that Andy Rooney used to deliver at the end of the broadcast of 60 Minutes all those years he was on. He'd start out by saying, "Don't you hate it when," and he was off and running. His complaints usually resonated with some pet peeve or aggravation that probably had silently crossed our own minds. The shrinking print in a phone book, the price of popcorn at the movies, CD wrappers that you need a blowtorch to get off, and the great eternal question of why fragile light bulbs are packaged in flimsy cardboard boxes that are open at both ends. No doubt, a good part of what his viewers were responding to was that elemental fact that most of us spend more time and energy complaining than we'd care to admit. And some more than others. And apart from the fact that he was paid $900,000 a year to complain on television, and the rest of us are doing it for free, we're all in the same boat. Things go wrong. People let us down. We don't get our way. The porridge is too hot or too cold. The movie is not as good as the book. Everything costs too much, etc., etc., etc. So whatever you might have thought about Andy Rooney's shtick, I think that there are two worthy characteristics about complaining of his that might be worth incorporating, or at least considering incorporating, into our own practice of complaining. The first thing I think we might emulate from him is to limit our complaining to just one day of the week. His was Sunday. You can take your own pick. The second guideline that I'd advocate following is that we, too, limit our complaining each week to approximately a period of 3 minutes in duration. Because, you know, you can get a lot in 3 minutes. Certainly as much as anyone sitting in our immediate vicinity would want to listen to. I dare say our lives could be transformed overnight if we could comply with just those little tiny modifications. So, I ask you, what are some of your favorite targets for complaints? And here I use the word favorite intentionally because I am convinced that there is this habitual dimension to all of our complaining that we actually end up finding rewarding in some kind of warped, unconscious way. So think about it just for a minute here. I complain about my doctor's office, about his phone system, which requires 7 or 8 prompts before a live human being can be summoned to the line. I complain about drivers who do not use their turn signals. I complain about months that have 5 Sundays in them. I complain about my daughter's voicemail is always too full to accept a new message. And a lot of good that complaining has done me. And you folks, what comes to your minds when you think about some of the most time-tested complaints that sort of rub you the wrong way? Anybody? Yeah.
Double TV ads. Calling my son and not having him answer the phone, sending him a text message and not having him answer the text message, sending him an email and not getting him to reply to the email. But he's at college.
Children in the Witness Protection Program. Over here.
Political ads.
Political ads. Well, let's hope they've gone to rest for a short time.
Ironically, complaining about people complaining too much.
Complaining, all right, good. Anybody else have one that's just works their nerves? Yeah.
People who don't take their dog's poop out.
Well, there's many, as we can tell, and we all have our own particular ones. So thank you for that brief experience of group confession. My interest this morning isn't to convince a single soul among you that you're not 100% entitled to find aspects of your own life that are unacceptable, disappointing, or just plain icky. And I do not want to separate anyone from their genuine experience and your earnest view of your own life's deficiencies. We all bump into that stuff. But my intent and hope in talking about this morning is to suggest forming perhaps an alternate means of engaging those things that are painful and perplexing, that stand in our way between ourself and a sense of contentment. Contentment, or maybe even peace. I'm really not sure that I'm telling anyone here anything you don't already know about the subject. All too often we treat our grievances like a collection of sort of fragile treasures we want to keep in a safe place, preserving them to remind ourselves of how unfair life might sometimes be. And it certainly is. But when we do that kind of thing, we simultaneously, and I think inadvertently, enshrine those things as something fixed and permanent as a part of our life's ongoing narrative. They function, when we use them in that way, as something, sort of a hall of fame of our grievances, as it were. And they accumulate and they never change, and they explain and justify our own reflex of complaining. The fact that any of those are authentic sources of pain or hurt that somehow have shaped us, those are all things that we ourselves didn't choose. But we have a choice. The choice is, do we somehow, we get to make this choice about, how far do we choose to drag them around with us? This accumulation that we all have rights to claim. So this morning I'm encouraging you to re-examine not only the grievances that you might have collected, but more essentially even your relationship to those grievances, if you will. If you're anything like me, there's some of them, well, you just kind of love. Those are the ones to vanquish first. And the seductive power of complaining about them will drift away. For example, say someone we know, their complaining centers around having been somehow a victim to life's circumstances, which is often an authentic experience. But it often can gradually shape how a person experiences the whole of their lives. It almost becomes a lens on life. I call it love at worst sight. And being a victim somehow becomes an identity and not just an experience that anyone might have. So when we break our attachment to that kind of interpretive lens, we allow everything to be different. And everything can be new and everything can be changed. Now, the tendency to complain varies among every single one of us. We all know people who, for whatever set of reasons, have every reason in the world to complain about what life has dealt them, but who somehow move through life with a kind of patience and grace and forbearance that defies all logic. When I think of this, I think of a man whose name was Dan Buckland. I was his minister many years ago in Syracuse. He had contracted polio as a child and had serious kidney disease that kept him sidelined through his full adult life. And there were times when he had to go into the hospital and he'd be there 40, 50 days a stretch. And I never heard a complaint out of him. Never. I loved visiting him. And he has a seat in my all-star congregation, which my imagination holds many dear people in. And then there are others, of course, who also become our teachers, whose complaints are so pervasive and frequent that to our ears they start sounding like Charlie Brown's teacher. You know, you don't really know what she's saying, but there it is, blurring together. There's a story I love that seems apropos here about a young monk who joined a religious order that required total silence. They lived and ate and worked and worshipped in pure silence. And at his discretion, the abbot of the monastery could allow any of the monks to speak. But it was almost 5 years before the abbot approached this particular novice monk and said, "You may speak 2 words." And he thought deeply and profoundly about this, and these words came out of the young monk's mouth: "Hard bed." With deep and genuine concern, the abbot said, "I'm very sorry your bed isn't comfortable. I'm going to be sure that before this day is over, a more comfortable bed has been moved into your quarters and you will now sleep well." The 10th anniversary of the monks being in the monastery came around, and the abbot again came to the monk and invited him to say again 2 words: "Cold food." the monk replied. Again, the abbot, solicitous man that he was, said that he would speak to the cook that day and that warm food would be the rule throughout the future. Well, predictably, the 15th anniversary came round. The abbot came and said, "You may speak 2 words." The monk thought for less time this time and said, "I quit." "Well, it's probably for the best," replied the abbot. "You have done nothing but complain since you got here." So what are we going to do about that? To quit our own kvetching quite so much. And remember, this is about you. Not your mother, not your partner, not your child or friend. We've all learned there's only one person in the universe who we have a remote chance of changing, and that is the person we see in the bathroom mirror each morning. So how might we shift our own thoughts and behaviors to give less space almost in our life to complain, and more space for grace to appear, and gratitude and blessing? On the one hand, of course, it's a huge challenge for any of us to change old habits that we have come to learn about being in the world. And on the other hand, it's as simple as deciding what we want to pay attention to. So, as I often do, I find great wisdom in the words of Rumi, who had this to say about our encounter with the world, shall we say. And I'll repeat it, because it's worth repeating. Rumi said this: "Take sips of this pure wine being poured. Don't mind that you've been given a dirty cup. Take sips of the pure wine being poured, and don't mind if you've been given a dirty cup." Because in refusing the dirty cup, we're going to miss out on some of the most abundant gifts the universe has. Because that's how most of them come to us. These holy and healing gestures of beauty and wisdom and compassion. They come to us in dirty cups that are held in offering by flawed and broken messengers that are like you and like me. An influence on my own spiritual life has long been the Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron. I love her books, but her recorded lectures really are what resonate with me. I listen to her a lot in the car, and I'm in the car a lot. So what I usually do is pretend she's just sitting there beside me in the front seat for company. Well, on a recent drive, she happened to tell me a few things that are pertinent to this topic. And since she's still out in the car, I'll be the one telling you. She speaks about a concept of echo in our lives. The idea being that we send what we send off into the world finds its way somehow back round to us. And because of that concept, she teaches us to mind the echo. That's her phrase, mind the echo. And this doesn't mean simply doing what some outside voice is telling us, but it means to pay attention to the reverberations that seem to be coming back to us in our lives. She maintains that everything that we say and do and think produces this metaphysical echo that returns to us, some portion of what we have put ourselves out into the world. So in this chain of thought, kindness begets kindness. And laughter begets laughter. And trust begets trust. And grace begets grace. Now, is the rate of return 100%? Yeah. In the long run, yes. In the short run, probably not. So don't complain to me the next time you see me that you were nice to somebody for 2 hours this afternoon. but your boss still made you work on Tuesday. That's actually not how it works. Gradually, one comes to realize that the reward, so to speak, is actually not measured by what immeasurable things are returned to us, but rather it's measured in and through the act of manifesting those blessings in our own encounters and carrying them out in the world. There simply can be no keeping score here. And for you behavioralists in the crowd, and there always are a few, with a lower tolerance for metaphor and mystery, I offer you Plan B. It comes from a book that is titled A Complaint-Free World. A complaint-free world. I think it must be shelved in the fantasy section at the bookstore. And despite my disdain for gimmicks, well, there you go, complaining again, it seems worth considering, or at least offering it to you. The gimmick part is this: a rubber band on your wrist. You put it on and you stop complaining. Magic. I'll be selling them right after the service. MasterCard and Visa accepted. No, not that simple. Here's what you got to do. You put it on your wrist with the goal of keeping it on the same wrist for 21 days. Alas, there's a catch. Every time you complain, you have to move it to the other wrist. And in doing so, the 21-day clock is reset. People are, It's sort of settling in. I can feel it out there. The author suggests that most of us complain 20 times a day. I think that's conservative. Maybe it's my line of work. I don't know. The premise of the rubber band routine is that none of us is ever really fully aware of how often we're mindlessly, thoughtlessly, effortlessly complaining about things. So the rubber band business is just a little mechanism by which our own awareness is raised and we become more thoughtful of the ways in which we're engaging with those around us. So really, I encourage you to give it a try. Any rubber band will do. And Sarah has assured me they will be available for distribution on the potluck lunch tables, should anyone feel so moved. And if you don't like the Brussels sprouts, button it up. Don't tell me somebody brought Brussels sprouts. Let's just say my first day with this exercise was an eye-opener. At the rate I'm going, I should be wearing this thing until spring of 2036. So whether you try to quit complaining for 21 days or 24 hours or whatever, I'm going to leave entirely to you should you decide to take it on. But the goal I'm setting out before you now is actually quite simple and yet ambitious. And here it is. I challenge you all to a complaint-free coffee hour / potluck lunch. I'm serious. Watch each other. Watch yourself. Listen closely. Speak thoughtfully. Focus yourself on those lapses that seem somehow to just slip out from yourself or your friends and loved ones. It's not a crime, but it is a choice that we each can make. Finding reasons to complain, in my opinion, is child's play. Ceasing to complain, there's the challenge. So if you take nothing else away from this morning, take away at least the awareness that in this matter, you have a choice. And for every complaint you consciously choose to abandon, you are making a space for gratitude and praise to emerge. Do your complaints foster connection, clarity, understanding? Do they bring you into some kind of a deeper and stronger relationship with your spirit? Do they make you more of who you would like to be in the world? Again, things you can make a choice about. I think it was Thoreau who said something to the effect that we only find what we're looking for. And if he didn't, well, he should have. So what shall we look for? It doesn't mean that we don't still have the capacity to see the shadow sides of life, which in my experience make themselves known quite adequately without any encouragement on my part. So let's choose, if we can and will, to experience the pure wine being poured. That pure wine being poured into each of our lives. And to recognize that from wherever it comes, it is untainted by the imperfect measures into which it is delivered to us. If you loved the sermon this morning, I'm glad. And if you didn't, I'm still moderately gratified. It means my work here is done. Either way, I'm not complaining.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.